What if I told you that everything you've ever been taught about prayer might be completely backwards? That the prayers you've been saying your entire life could actually be reinforcing the very problems you're desperately trying to solve? I know that sounds shocking, perhaps even controversial. But stay with me here because what you're about to discover has the power to completely transform how you approach every challenge in your life. For years, Smith Wigglesworth kept a secret. This man, known throughout history for his extraordinary healings and miraculous demonstrations of faith, possessed a prayer technique so revolutionary, so radically different from conventional Christian practice, that he hesitated before teaching it publicly. Why? Because it challenged everything people believed about how prayer works. It went against centuries of religious tradition. And yet, the results were undeniable. Financial crises dissolved overnight. Marriages on the brink of divorce experienced complete restoration. Physical ailments that doctors couldn't explain simply vanished. Lives that seemed destined for failure suddenly transformed into stories of triumph. But here's what most people don't understand, and this is crucial. This prayer technique doesn't involve asking God for anything. It doesn't require you to plead, beg, or bargain with the divine. In fact, if you're doing any of those things, you're actually working against the very principle that makes this method so powerful. Has this ever happened to you? You pray and pray about a problem, describing it in detail to God, asking Him to fix it, to change it, to make it better, and yet nothing seems to shift? You might even feel like your prayers are hitting the ceiling, bouncing back without reaching heaven at all. But before we dive deeper into this life-changing revelation, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now, what Wigglesworth discovered changes everything. He called it the prayer of recognition, and it operates on a principle that most Christians have never even considered. Instead of asking God to change your circumstances, you're doing something entirely different. You're recognizing something that already exists right now, in this very moment, even while the problem appears to be real and overwhelming in your physical experience. This isn't positive thinking. This isn't just declaring affirmations or speaking things into existence. This is something far more profound, something that operates at the level of consciousness itself. Think about this for a moment. What if the problem you're facing isn't actually the real problem? What if the true issue is your perception, your consciousness, your way of seeing the situation? What you're about to discover might surprise you, because this technique doesn't focus on the problem at all. It shifts your entire awareness to recognize God's perfection that's already present, already established, already complete. Let me give you the exact technique that Wigglesworth taught, because this is where the real transformation begins. When you're facing any challenge, any obstacle, any situation that seems overwhelming, you speak these words with absolute inner conviction. God's perfect solution is already here. I recognize divine order operating now. This situation is resolved in God's infinite wisdom. Now I need you to understand something critical here. The power doesn't come from the words themselves. You could repeat these words 1,000 times like a mantra and see no results whatsoever if you're missing the key ingredient. The real power lies in the recognition that shifts your consciousness. It's that moment when something clicks inside you, when you genuinely perceive the truth behind what you're declaring, rather than just hoping it might be true. This isn't an overnight journey. This practice typically requires consistent application over weeks or months to fully integrate into your daily life and your entire way of being. But here's what makes it so different from everything else you've tried. Most people approach prayer like they're filing a complaint with the universe. They describe their problems in vivid detail to God, listing everything that's wrong, everything that hurts, everything that needs fixing. And with every word, with every detailed description, they're actually feeding energy into the very circumstances they're trying to escape. Has this ever been your experience? You spend 30 minutes in prayer outlining your financial crisis, your relationship breakdown, your health struggles, and somehow you feel even more burdened when you finish? That's because you've just spent 30 minutes training your consciousness to see problems. You've reinforced the reality of lack, separation, and limitation. Wigglesworth discovered that this mental activity is precisely what keeps problems alive and thriving in our experience. The prayer of recognition does something radically different. It stops this destructive mental pattern completely. Instead of rehearsing what's wrong, you're aligning your consciousness with what's already true in spiritual reality. You're stepping out of problem consciousness and into solution consciousness. This is a fundamental shift in perception, a complete transformation of your inner landscape. Think about it this way. When you're trapped in problem consciousness, you're constantly looking at what's missing, what's broken, what needs to change. Your entire focus becomes the obstacle. But when you shift into solution consciousness through recognition, you're seeing from an entirely different dimension. You're perceiving the divine order that exists beyond physical appearances. You're tapping into a hidden truth that's been there all along, waiting for you to acknowledge it. This isn't about denying reality or pretending problems don't exist. It's about recognizing a deeper reality that supersedes temporary circumstances. If you're serious about transforming your spiritual understanding and want more content like this that goes beyond surface-level teachings, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm committed to bringing you deep, practical wisdom that actually changes lives. Now, I want to go even deeper into this concept because understanding the mechanics of consciousness is what makes this technique truly effective. When Wigglesworth taught this method, he emphasized that we're not trying to convince God of anything. God doesn't need our arguments or explanations. What needs to change is our own awareness, our own inner vision. And this is where most people miss the profound impact of what's actually happening during this practice. Write in the comments, "I'm ready for this shift," if you're feeling the truth of what we're exploring here. Here's something fascinating that you need to understand about timing, because this is where many people stumble and give up right before their breakthrough. The consciousness shift itself can happen immediately. In fact, some people experience it in an instant, like waking up from a dream. That sudden clarity, that moment of recognition where everything just clicks and you see the situation from a completely different perspective. But the outer manifestation, the physical evidence of that inner transformation, usually unfolds gradually. Some practitioners see tangible changes within days. Their circumstances begin shifting. Opportunities appear. Solutions emerge, seemingly out of nowhere. For others, it takes weeks of consistent practice before the breakthrough occurs in their external reality. And this is where the real test of your commitment comes in. The key is persistence, without desperation. Do you see the difference? Desperation is still operating from problem consciousness. It's saying, "I need this to work right now, or I'm doomed." But true persistence comes from a different place entirely. You're practicing recognition not because God needs to do something for you, but because you're training yourself to see what's already there. You're developing a new way of perceiving reality itself. It's like learning a new language or developing a new skill. At first, it feels awkward and unnatural. You have to consciously remind yourself to shift your thinking. But with consistent practice, it becomes your default mode of operation. What Wigglesworth discovered through decades of spiritual healing work is perhaps the most liberating revelation you'll ever encounter. Every single problem exists only in human consciousness. Now, before you dismiss that as spiritual bypassing or denying reality, let me explain what this actually means. In God's consciousness, which is the only real consciousness, the only permanent and eternal consciousness, perfection is already established. It can never be disturbed, never be threatened, never be diminished. This perfection exists right now, in this very moment, regardless of what your physical senses are telling you. The challenge we face as human beings is that we've been trained since birth to identify exclusively with human consciousness. We see through the lens of limitation, separation, and lack. We believe what our eyes show us is the complete picture of reality. But what if it's not? What if physical appearances are just shadows on the wall, temporary projections of deeper spiritual truths? When you practice the prayer of recognition, you're not trying to change God's mind about your situation. God's mind has never changed. Divine perfection has always been present. What you're actually doing is changing your own consciousness to align with God's eternal perfection. You're learning to see what God sees, to know what God knows. This is the hidden truth behind every miraculous healing, every impossible restoration, every unexplainable breakthrough that Wigglesworth witnessed throughout his ministry. He wasn't begging God to intervene. He was recognizing the divine reality that was already present, and his recognition allowed that reality to manifest in physical form. The impact of this understanding on your daily life cannot be overstated. When you truly grasp that problems exist only in consciousness, not in reality, everything changes. Your relationship with challenges transforms completely. You're no longer fighting against circumstances. You're simply adjusting your vision, tuning into a frequency that's been broadcasting all along, but that you couldn't perceive before. Now let me show you exactly what happens when people begin applying this principle consistently in their actual lives, because the testimonies are absolutely remarkable. Write in the comments, "I'm changing my consciousness," if this revelation is landing for you right now. Take Margaret, for instance. She was a single mother staring down eviction after 3 months of unemployment. Every job application felt like throwing stones into a bottomless pit. Nothing was coming back. The desperation was suffocating her, creating this vicious cycle where her anxiety about money was actually blocking the very opportunities she needed to see. Her mind was consumed with lack, with fear, with worst-case scenarios playing on repeat. But then she discovered Wigglesworth's prayer of recognition during the darkest moment of her crisis. She began practicing it daily, speaking with genuine conviction. God's perfect provision is already here. I recognize divine order operating now. Now Margaret told me something profound about what happened next. For the first week, nothing changed externally. Bills still piled up. Her bank account still showed the same painful numbers. But something was shifting inside her consciousness. After 2 weeks of consistent practice, she experienced what she described as a complete internal transformation. Her consciousness moved from desperate seeking to confident knowing. She wasn't hoping provision would come. She was recognizing it was already present, already established, already moving toward manifestation. And here's where it gets really interesting. Within a month of this consciousness shift, she found full-time employment through what seemed like pure chance, a casual conversation with her neighbor about something completely unrelated that led to an unexpected opportunity. But was it really chance? Or was her transformed consciousness now able to perceive and receive what had been there all along? David's journey reveals another dimension of this principle. He's an accountant, logical and analytical by nature, and his marriage had deteriorated to the point where divorce seemed inevitable. Years of accumulated resentment had created what felt like an unbridgeable gap between him and his wife. They'd tried counseling. They'd tried date nights. They'd tried everything conventional wisdom suggests for struggling marriages. Nothing was working, because they were both operating from problem consciousness, constantly focusing on what was wrong, what needed fixing, what the other person should change. Then David encountered the prayer of recognition and made a decision that seemed almost naive to his rational mind. He began declaring daily, "God's perfect love is already here. I recognize divine harmony operating now." For months he maintained this practice even when his wife's behavior didn't change, even when arguments still erupted, even when circumstances looked exactly the same. But David was undergoing an internal revolution. Instead of mentally cataloging his wife's faults, he began recognizing the divine love that existed between them at a level deeper than personality conflicts. His transformed consciousness created space for something miraculous to unfold. 6 months later, they celebrated what felt like an entirely renewed marriage. The breakthrough came when David realized the problem had never been their circumstances, their compatibility, or even their communication patterns. The problem had been his consciousness, his way of perceiving the relationship. When that shifted, everything else shifted naturally. These aren't isolated incidents or exceptional cases. This is what happens when you consistently align your consciousness with divine reality rather than human appearances. The transformation happens from the inside out, changing your entire experience of life itself. But here's what I find most remarkable about both of these stories, and countless others like them. Write in the comments, "Recognition changes everything," if you're beginning to see how this principle applies to your own situation right now. Sarah's story takes this principle into an even more challenging territory. She was a business owner watching everything she'd built over years crumble in front of her eyes. A major client canceled their contract, and it created a domino effect that pushed her consulting firm toward bankruptcy. The fear was paralyzing. For weeks, she couldn't think clearly, couldn't make good decisions, couldn't see any way forward. Her mind was trapped in disaster consciousness, running endless scenarios of failure and loss. When she began practicing recognition prayer regarding her crisis, something fascinating happened. The first month was an absolute battle. Doubt fought against faith with every declaration she made. Part of her mind kept saying, "This is foolish. You need to face reality. You need to panic and scramble and figure something out right now." But she persisted with the recognition. God's perfect solution is already here. I recognize divine order operating now. And gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, her perspective began to shift. She stopped seeing disaster and started recognizing opportunity. What had seemed like the end was actually a doorway to something new. Within 8 months, her business had not only recovered but expanded beyond its previous size. She'd attracted better clients, developed more innovative services, discovered revenue streams she'd never considered before. Sarah learned something that transformed her entire approach to challenges. Problems often contain seeds of greater good that are visible only through transformed consciousness. What looks like catastrophe from one level of awareness reveals itself as divine orchestration from another. If this message resonated with your spirit today, show me by hitting that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps this content reach others who are searching for these exact answers. Now, I want to go even deeper into the mechanics of how this actually works because Wigglesworth didn't stop with just the prayer of recognition. He developed a second technique that addresses something most people never consider. He called it spiritual treatment, and it operates on a principle that completely revolutionizes how you approach any difficulty. Instead of treating the problem itself, you're treating the false belief that creates the problem. Think about this for a moment. Every single problem you face has a corresponding false belief supporting it, like scaffolding holding up a building. Financial lack doesn't exist in a vacuum. It comes from believing in limitation, from accepting scarcity as ultimate reality. Relationship conflict doesn't just happen randomly. It emerges from believing in separation, from seeing yourself as fundamentally disconnected from others. Health challenges, career obstacles, family struggles, all of them are built on foundations of false beliefs about who you are and how reality actually works. The spiritual treatment process is brilliantly simple, yet profoundly effective. You identify the false belief first. What lie are you believing that makes this problem seem real and permanent? Then you consciously reject it. You don't fight it or argue with it. You simply recognize it has no power, no truth, no authority over your experience. And finally, you recognize the spiritual truth that replaces it. For financial challenges, you recognize abundance as God's very nature. For relationship problems, you recognize divine love and unity as the only reality. For health issues, you recognize perfection as your true, spiritual identity. This isn't just positive thinking with religious language attached to it. This is addressing the root cause rather than endlessly managing symptoms. Wigglesworth discovered that when you uproot the false belief, the problem loses its foundation and collapses naturally. But here's what makes this technique so powerful when combined with the prayer of recognition. Write in the comments, "I'm treating the belief." If you're recognizing the false beliefs you've been unconsciously accepting in your own life, you're addressing both the surface symptom and the underlying cause simultaneously, creating a complete transformation at every level of consciousness. But there's a third technique that Wigglesworth taught, and this one might be the hardest for many people to accept because it goes against everything our culture teaches us about success and achievement. He called it the grace method, and it addresses what he identified as the human effort trap. Most of us have been conditioned since childhood to believe that problems get solved through sheer personal will and intense struggle. We think if we just work harder, push more, fight longer, eventually we'll break through to the solution. But here's what Wigglesworth discovered that turned conventional wisdom completely upside down. This approach of constant striving and personal effort actually blocks the very help we're seeking. It's like trying to hear someone whisper while you're shouting at the top of your lungs. Divine intelligence is always providing solutions, always offering guidance, always orchestrating circumstances in your favor. But your frantic human effort creates so much noise that you can't perceive what's being offered. The grace method involves a radical decision to step back from personal effort and allow divine intelligence to work through you, rather than trying to force outcomes through your limited human thinking. After using the prayer of recognition, you add this declaration: I step back from human effort. Divine intelligence is providing the perfect solution. I am open and receptive to guidance. Then you do something that feels completely counterintuitive. You wait. You listen. You remain alert but not anxious, expectant but not demanding. And here's what happens when you create this space of receptivity. Ideas come that you couldn't have thought of on your own. Opportunities appear from unexpected directions. People show up at exactly the right moment with exactly what you need. Solutions emerge that are far more elegant and effective than anything your struggling mind could have manufactured. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means your actions become inspired rather than desperate, flowing from divine guidance rather than human fear. The transformation in how you approach challenges is absolutely remarkable. Instead of exhausting yourself through constant striving, you're tapping into an intelligence that's infinitely greater than your own. But let me be honest with you about something that every person faces when learning these techniques. Your logical mind is going to rebel. It's going to fight against recognizing perfection while you're still experiencing problems. This mental resistance is completely normal, and Wigglesworth had profound insight into how to handle it. He taught something that might shock you at first. Doubt is actually a form of prayer. When you doubt that divine perfection is present, when you question whether this recognition technique really works, you're unconsciously praying for your problems to continue. You're reinforcing problem consciousness through your skepticism. But here's the beautiful solution he offered. You don't fight the doubt. You don't feel guilty about it. You simply recognize it as impersonal mental activity that has absolutely no power over spiritual truth. Doubt is just thought patterns, mental habits you've developed over years of problem-focused thinking. It's not who you are, and it has no authority to determine your reality. The technique is elegantly simple. When doubt arises, you observe it without judgment, recognize it as temporary mental noise, then gently return to your recognition prayer with renewed understanding. This process of working with doubt, rather than against it, gradually weakens its hold on your consciousness. Write in the comments, grace over effort, if you're feeling the relief of releasing that constant struggle and opening to divine intelligence instead. What often happens, though, is that people encounter these techniques during emotional storms when fear, anger, or grief are completely overwhelming their consciousness. In those moments, trying to leap directly from emotional chaos to recognition of divine perfection can feel absolutely impossible. Your entire being is consumed by the feeling, and the gap between where you are and where you're trying to go seems insurmountable. This is where Wigglesworth's wisdom becomes truly practical and accessible. He created what he called the stepping stone technique specifically for these intense moments when you can't make that giant leap in one bound. Instead of forcing yourself from panic to peace in a single jump, you take intermediate steps that gradually elevate your consciousness to a place where recognition becomes natural. You start by acknowledging something profoundly liberating. The emotion you're experiencing isn't your true identity. You speak to yourself with gentle but firm clarity. I am not this fear. I am not this anger. I am not this grief. These feelings are real, yes, but they're temporary experiences passing through your consciousness like clouds moving across the sky. They're not the sky itself. They're not who you fundamentally are. Once you've created that crucial separation between your true self and the emotional storm, you take the next step by recognizing what you actually are. I am God's beloved child, eternally safe and loved. This progression might seem simple, but it's psychologically and spiritually brilliant. You're not denying the emotion or suppressing it. You're putting it in its proper context and reconnecting with your deeper identity. From this elevated consciousness, the prayer of recognition becomes accessible again. You can genuinely declare divine perfection is present because you're no longer completely identified with the problem. The stepping stone technique. prevents what many people experience as spiritual bypassing, where you're trying to use positive declarations to avoid feeling legitimate emotions. This approach honors your human experience while guiding you back to your spiritual truth. Now, I want to reveal what Wigglesworth considered his most advanced and transformative technique. And this is where everything we've discussed comes together into a complete understanding of who you really are. He called it Christ consciousness recognition. And before you react to the terminology, let me explain exactly what this means. This isn't about claiming to be Jesus or adopting some kind of spiritual superiority. It's recognizing that the Christ consciousness that Jesus expressed, that divine awareness, that perfect union with God, is actually the true identity of every single person. Not Jesus, the historical man, but the consciousness he demonstrated, the awareness of divine sonship he lived from. The practice involves a declaration that might feel audacious at first but becomes increasingly natural as you understand its truth. The same Christ consciousness that Jesus expressed is my true identity right now. I am the beloved child in whom God is well pleased. Divine love, wisdom, and power expressed naturally through me. This recognition goes beyond solving individual problems. It establishes your permanent identification with your spiritual nature, rather than your temporary human personality. When you live from this awareness, consistently, problems don't just get solved. They increasingly fail to arise in the first place because your consciousness has been elevated to a dimension where many challenges simply cannot exist. This is the ultimate journey Wigglesworth was inviting people to take, moving from problem-focused living to identity-focused living, from human consciousness to Christ consciousness. And the impact of this shift extends far beyond your personal experience into how you interact with every person and situation you encounter. Write in the comments, "I am Christ consciousness," if you're ready to embrace this radical understanding of your true spiritual identity. When you begin operating from Christ consciousness, something remarkable happens with how you approach what most people call manifestation or goal setting. Wigglesworth's final technique addresses this from the highest spiritual level possible, and it completely revolutionizes the entire concept of attracting what you want. Most manifestation teachings have you focusing intensely on specific outcomes, visualizing exact scenarios, trying to bend reality to match your desires. But here's the hidden truth that changes everything. You're operating from limited human perspective when you do that. You're asking for what you think you need based on incomplete information and temporary understanding. Divine design recognition takes you to an entirely different dimension. Instead of trying to attract specific things, you recognize that divine intelligence has already established a perfect design for your life. Think about this for a moment. The same intelligence that orchestrates galaxies, that coordinates trillions of cells in your body, that maintains the precise balance allowing life to exist on this planet. That intelligence has a design for your life that's far more magnificent than anything your human mind could conceive. The practice involves a declaration of trust and receptivity. Divine intelligence has designed my perfect life. Everything I need is already included in this divine design. I recognize and accept God's will for me, knowing it exceeds my human wishes and imagination. This isn't passive resignation or giving up on dreams. It's aligning yourself with something infinitely greater than your limited perspective. When you practice this recognition, you're opening yourself to possibilities you couldn't have imagined, opportunities that transcend your current understanding, a path that's been prepared specifically for your highest expression and deepest fulfillment. The results often surprise people because what manifests exceeds what they thought they wanted. Divine design always includes more than human planning can conceive. Now, integrating all of these techniques into your daily life creates a completely transformed way of being in the world. This isn't about memorizing complicated rituals or spending hours in spiritual practice. Wigglesworth designed these techniques to be practical and accessible for everyday people living regular lives. The integration is actually quite simple, but profoundly effective when practiced consistently. You begin each morning, even if it's just 5 minutes, with Christ consciousness recognition. You're establishing your spiritual identity as the foundation for everything that follows in your day. When challenges arise throughout the day, and they will, You immediately apply the prayer of recognition rather than falling into problem consciousness. For persistent challenges that keep showing up, you use the spiritual treatment method to address the underlying false beliefs. When you find yourself exhausted from personal effort and struggle, you apply the grace method, stepping back and allowing divine intelligence to guide you. And here's what ties everything together beautifully. You end each day by recognizing divine design in everything that occurred, both what you perceived as good and what seemed challenging. This practice transforms even difficulties into spiritual opportunities, maintaining a consciousness that naturally attracts continued good into your experience. The real power of daily integration is that you're creating consciousness that prevents problems rather than just healing them after they appear. You're living proactively from spiritual truth rather than reactively from human appearances. This shift from crisis management to consciousness establishment is what made Wigglesworth's approach so revolutionary and so consistently effective across every area of life. Write in the comments, "Divine design is unfolding," if you're feeling the truth of this complete approach to spiritual living. You've just received something that most people never discover in their entire spiritual journey. These aren't just techniques or methods to try when you're desperate. This is a complete framework for living from your true identity, for seeing reality as it actually is rather than how it appears to be. Wigglesworth spent decades developing and refining these practices, and now you have them all at your fingertips. If you've made it this far, that tells me something important about you. You're not just casually browsing spiritual content. You're genuinely seeking transformation, real change, lasting solutions. And I want to continue walking this path with you. So if this resonated with you, if you found value in what we've explored together, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm bringing you more content like this, diving deep into spiritual principles that actually work in the real world, techniques from the great teachers who demonstrated these truths through their lives. And leave a comment for me saying, "This was meant for me, so I know you made it all the way through." I read every single comment, and it genuinely matters to me knowing that this material is connecting with people who are ready for it. Your engagement helps this message reach others who need to hear it too. Hit the like button as well if this shifted something in your consciousness today. Even if it's just the beginning of a shift, even if you're still processing everything we've covered, that like helps tremendously. Now, there's a video right here that goes even deeper into living from spiritual consciousness in practical ways. It complements everything we've discussed today, and I think you'll find it incredibly valuable. Click and continue with me over there. Let's keep this journey going together.